It is finally time for the lift. Got the truck in the garage sideways. My watch says it's 12 degrees outside. It's about the same in here. Here's the parts. Came with a business card, sticker, koozie, front spacers for the coilovers, rear pucks for the subframe drop, spacers for the rear coils, and some spacers for the trailing link. You can find these guys on FordRangerLifts.com or by searching Woolworth Motorsports. They got a video on a Bronco Sport, which is basically the same thing. That's what I watched. So, not telling you how to do it, I'm just showing you how I did it. 21mm socket, jack it up, take the wheels off. To gain access to the nuts, you gotta take off 6 clips. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and this whole plastic piece should come out of the way to gain access to the top of those nuts or bolts on top of that coil. I'm just using a pick. Then this piece comes right out. This little tail is kind of tucked down in there, but there's nothing holding that back part on. And do the same for the other side. For the top coilover bolts, just take 2 out and leave 1 loose, so the whole thing won't drop out when you disconnect all the hardware on the bottom. So now for the bottom, it's basically just taking everything off that you can see. You're going to loosen the CV axle nut, just so that's loose. You're not going to take the axle all the way out. Take off the brake line. It's 1 bolt back here. Your ABS is just this plastic connector. You can pop this out of the way. Sway bar link. Your steering linkage. Just take all that out, and this whole coilover should come right out. Take off the CV axle nut. Body panel remover, a little pry bar. It slides right down on it perfectly. You can pull it out without damaging that little plastic clip, and then this little rubber piece just pulls right out towards you to get that out of the way. And unplug the ABS connector at the bottom. These 2 nuts are 21mm, and this is a 15mm. Don't hit this. Hit the side of the spindle with the hammer. This should fall right out. And then the last one should be a 18mm. To remove this, and then everything should be disconnected. Just a little 8mm right here for the brake line, and this should all come out. Alright, so this is what you're left with. CV axle nut is just on a few threads. Hit it with a rubber mallet so I don't jack up the threads on the CV axle. Just to get that a little bit loose. Got your steering out of the way. Hit it with the side. Hit the side of the spindle with a metal hammer. Falls right out. These 2 nuts come out. Just tap them out easy with a hammer. Sway bar linkage. There shouldn't be much pressure on there. You can just pull that out. ABS line's out of the way. Brake line's out of the way. You see it's just dangling from that 1 top bolt we left in, remember? It's just dangling by this nut right here. Or bolt, I guess. Take that bolt out. The whole tower should come out now. Alright, now that it's off, you can see a pretty distinct shape. It's the same as the spacer, can't really get it wrong. So the stock hardware is going to go in these holes, back into here. You could use a little blue or red thread lock, whatever you like. And these are going to replace the top bolts on top with nuts instead. Alright, spacers on. These are the factory bolts that were on top under the hood. And now we just have to clearance this out a little bit because it's going to be pretty close to the CV boot. So you just have to take off that little lip with the grinder. That little bit should be all that it takes. Just cut that lip off so the CV axle has just a tiny bit more clearance. Hit that with some primer, paint, steel it, whatever you got, and throw it back together. Alright, hit it with a little bit of primer, some satin black. While that's drying, I guess I'll pull the other side out, and after that's out, I'll throw this side back on. First side's in, it was a bear and a half, because obviously everything's 2 inches lower. I'm only like 135 pounds, so I had a heck of a time pushing this lower A-arm down far enough to get these big bolts started. And then to get that top bolt in, I ended up putting a ratchet strap around the shock and put my foot on the disc brake rotor. Every time I pushed it, I snugged up on the ratchet strap just to get this top nut hole lined up. I put a jack underneath the A-arm to jack it up just a little bit to put this sway bar link in, so I didn't jack up the threads or have to force on that too much. But after those 2 big bolts were in, everything else went in pretty smooth. I'm planning on running 255/75 17s, which is the biggest tire they recommend, with some trimming. Just finished the front. There's a pretty big gap there now, which is awesome. I took off a couple of these clips right here and peeled back the fender lining, and this is the pinch weld. You know, these are stock tires on it still. You can obviously see where just this corner and maybe this plastic piece is going to be an issue. So I'm just going to trim a corner of this off, probably weld it and throw some paint on there, and hopefully that'll be enough. I don't have to trim too much more without rubbing, so we'll see. But I'm going to do that first before I take this in to get those tires put on, because that looks like it's just going to tear my tires apart on the way home with barely any turning. Alright, there it is. So I just hacked off a little bit. You can see it on the ground there. I'm not going to zoom in because my welds are atrocious, but cut it off, ran a weld down the seam and hit it with some primer, and I'll hit it with the top coat. And there is a mold that kind of sticks out on the fender liner, so the tire's probably going to rub that if you don't cut it off. I might just leave it on there and see what part the tire rubs away, but I'm hoping that's enough that the tire won't rub, and I'm about to do it on the other side as well. Alright, time for the rear. This is the passenger side. There's 2 15mm bolts. I just threw on a quick yellow paint strip for these just so I know kind of how they line up and I don't get them mixed up. And also I added my own little yellow paint stripe to line up with these blue ones from the factory, so I know the coil goes on correctly with this little rubber spacer gasket thing. Alright, got the factory rubber spacer on top of the 1-inch spacer. Tried to line up my little yellow mark with the factory blue marks, and just used my jack to gently lift the lower A-arm to line up that bolt. It went in super easy. Alright, both coil spacers installed on the rears. You remove this factory little plastic piece. It goes on the bottom of this little rubber gasket. You don't need this. I labeled it left and right, and I'm gonna throw it in my junk drawer forever. The rubber gasket slides on top of the new spacer in the same orientation you took it off. The big gap, or this arrow, is pointing towards the wheel, or towards the outside. Throw those 2 bolts back in on the bottom of the A-arm. I just use the jack underneath to lightly jack the lower A-arm back in place. The left side, the second side, it took like 10-15 minutes, so that part of the lift is super easy. Now we're moving on to trailing arm spacers. So here's the driver rear brake. This arm is the trailing arm. So just rolling underneath. There's a bolt on each side, 15 millimeter. 1, 2. Those come out. These spacers go on each side. Boom, boom. With slightly bigger and longer bolts. Right, you can see the spacers are in. I was fighting with these a lot. I was fighting with tension and pry bars and all kinds of crazy stuff. So instead of forcing that and risking cross-threading that, I just loosened these two trailing arm mounting bolts. I didn't take them all the way off. You can see the threads stick out quite a bit, so I just backed them out so this whole plate was loose, and then I had a lot more room to play with for the spacers up here. Alright, instructions say to install the back two subframe spacer pucks first. So I have the jack underneath the rear diff supporting the whole subframe. I loosened all 4 mounting bolts, and I'm taking them out one at a time and hand threading in the longer bolt. I'm just giving enough space that the puck can slide in there. It's going to go on top like a cup. The open end is facing up like you're drinking from this. The flat washer is going to sit against this subframe right here. So once I get all 4 of these hand loosened, I'm going to slowly lower the jack, lowering the subframe. I'm going to put these back 2 pucks in first like the instructions say. I'll try to lower it a little bit more and put the front pucks in. But I'm only taking 1 bolt out at a time, putting the puck in, putting the bolt in. So it all stays centered and I don't have to fight tension and I don't accidentally cross thread something. There it is, finished product. So this didn't actually need exhaust spacers like the Bronco Sport. There's enough clearance, there's like over 1/4 inch, so no worries about that. The lift is basically the same as the Bronco Sport. You can watch their video too for reference. But it's got a decent little gap now. I already trimmed the firewall pinch weld, so hopefully KO2s don't rub. Back looks good. Here's the pucks installed. Torque those down to 65 just like the instructions said. Here's a look at the exhaust. There's good clearance there, so I guess you could probably just get a longer exhaust hanger, a rubber one if you needed to drop it down a little bit, but I was shaking it. It didn't look like it was gonna hit. So, pretty cool. Tires and alignment tomorrow. Taking it to Les Schwab down the street from my house.